Looking for clarity and confidence when it comes to decision making for your business? You've come to the right place. You're now listening to the Atomic Business Coaching Podcast.
Okay, welcome back. We're so excited for you today because you don't have to listen much to Adam and Tom. Isn't that right, Tom?
That's right, Adam. At the change for once.
Yeah, so we don't have guests on all the time, but we have found one that we feel brings a tremendous value to our community of business owners. We have Evan Mestman on, which Tom is going to do a nice introduction. And today what we're going to talk about is how to optimize health for business owners. That's all of you. So Tom, why don't you let them know who Evan is?
Sure. So, Evan is a health and wellness and mindset coach. He's also a registered dietitian and diabetic educator, and he's authored a book called The Habits of Healthy Eating. And, Evan, we welcome you to the show. You and I have a kinship being in the healthcare space, knowing how important as a former physician assistant. I always talk about health with people and how it's so important as business owners to be healthy individuals. So thanks for being here.
So, Evan, we're going to go through some questions and get some feedback, hopefully teach the audience. But before we do that, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit more? Let us know about your background as well.
Sure. Thank you. By the way, I'm grateful to be on this podcast and have the opportunity to talk to you business owners. I started in this field way back when I was my first client. My nickname was Heavy Heavy. And I didn't like getting bullied, but I wanted to do something about it. And I finally did. But it really was just changing simple habits day over day over day. I saw my mom go on crazy diets every Monday, and she started a new one. My father would pop every vitamin pill there was and go on these super crazy exercise programs. I was like, this is not for me. And I just decided to change ordinary habits, and it led to a transformation over a summer. And I've been reverse engineering that ever since. So I decided to go for my master's in clinical nutrition, and I wanted to learn everything there was about health. So my background is I am a personal trainer. I was a manager in a health club while I was also going for my master's. I'm an adjunct professor. I've taught 10 years nutrition and performance, and as an adjunct professor, nutrition and disease. I also spent almost 14 years running my private practice back when, being an entrepreneur. And I started a wellness company that was a startup back then. And that wellness company was something that gave me an opportunity to have an impact with thousands of people. I was only able to see 30, 40 patients a week or clients a week. And to me, that opportunity was great. But unfortunately, we went public on 9/11/2001 in Cantor Fitzgerald. And this wonderful opportunity went from a hero to zero. And I pivoted into corporate America and spent 20 years in sales and management and in leadership. Big companies like Roth, 3M, Combatech, building teams, being part of a go-to-market strategy, global market strategy for new products. And it was a really great experience. But COVID gave me an opportunity to come back to doing what I love to do. And that is really helping business owners, leaders that are out there who are struggling because they've climbed the ladder to success and they left their health behind. That's in a nutshell of really what I do. I help them live their life and lose weight with their minds, not their mouth. I help them also be intentional with their health. And lastly, I help them quiet their inner critic. It's the one thing that we talk to more than anybody is ourselves. And the whole concept is, hey, it's negative mostly because by default. What if we could turn that around? Instead of having an inner critic, we had an inner coach. And that's what I do with my clients.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Evan. And thanks so much for being on here. Tom and I have gotten an opportunity to know you over a few meetings, both in person and on Zoom. And that's really why we wanted to bring Evan on here today, was to go over that. So in the next section, we're going to talk about what he said there, which is how to lose weight with your mind, not your mouth. All right. So in this section, we're going to get Evan to teach all of us what I have heard him say so many times. So I'm actually interested in this myself, as I hope all of you watching and listening are, is how do you lose weight with your mind and not your mouth? So take it away, Evan. I'm very interested in this.
So the concept, it catches you, right? It's like, well, why am I losing weight with my mind and not my mouth? Well, diets, everybody's on a diet. Their diets are out there forever. And I went to school, I learned about all the different diets. Diets are transactional. And if you think about, what's transactional, you're exchanging something for something else. So let's say you want to go on vacation, you want to look good, you want that six pack, or you want to look good in your bathing suit. You're going to go on a diet. It's all about outcomes. That's transactional. And part of the problem with that is that diets don't work. 98.9% of diets that people go on, they gain the weight back. I mean, even the statistics for gastric bypass surgery, where people go in there and literally destroy their insides and bypass their stomach and just really change their whole digestive system. In 3 years, 85% of the people gain the weight back. And within 5 years, you have almost 90% weight gain. So it's a little better, but not much. And you're going under the knife. So what do I mean? Well, I don't believe that the diseases of today, like obesity, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune function, are strictly diseases of metabolism. I really believe they're diseases of the neural pathways in our brain. It all comes down to habits. And if we can change those neural pathways, you can change really the habits, and and the habits are the system that's going to get you where you want to go. And you have to start falling in love with the system and not the outcome. That's really how I help people have a better relationship with themselves, with food, with everyone around them, including their family and their bosses or their teams. It's really about that relationship that's so important.
Great. So what are some of the ways that people can start to use their mind instead of their mouth to actually go ahead and change their eating habits or do the weight losses, like you say, or get away from the diets?
The first step is self-awareness. So the thing that I work on with my clients, 85% of the world lives just waking up and just winging it. They're not self-aware. So self-awareness is just about being a fly on the wall. And that's the first thing I teach my clients, how to be a fly on the wall, that you're not your thoughts. You're not your feelings. You're the witness to your thoughts and feelings. And if you can separate from that and just be that person, just imagine, right? Having this ability to say, well, that thought, that feeling doesn't control me. Viktor Frankl said it best: between stimulus and response, there's a space. That space only happens when you're self-aware, and that provides you the freedom to change.
Right. Evan, you're talking about losing weight with your mind, right? And we say diets don't work, but does that still excuse us to not eat the healthiest of foods?
No, and that's a great question. Okay. So that's why I start with losing weight with your mind, not your mouth. Then I say, be intentional with your eating. So I had a client this morning, and we have the hardest.
I'm going to interrupt because the next section, we're going to get into the intention behind health. So with this one, we'll stick to a little more tactical on how they could use the mind instead of just the mouth. Or that's really what we want anyone watching this to take away is, how are they going to think differently about their weight loss, right? And then we can go into more health and the intention behind it in the next section.
Okay. Well, the most important thing when you're focusing on really changing your relationship with your food, once you have the self-awareness, is that you need to start being accountable for the habits that you have. So part of this is first, not being judgmental, but being discerning. That's why I work with the inner critic. I help people identify who that inner critic is in their head. We all have one. And that inner critic was developed to protect us because we have really duality that's happening in our lives. We have this part of us, that part of our minds, that physical mind, that fight or flight response that we need to survive and procreate. And then there's another part, which I will call the soul or the spiritual, the higher level energy of needing to grow. So we have this duality of control, being in the comfort zone, and growth, of wanting to constantly grow. And I think it was by design. And part of what I do is to teach people, how do you get out of your comfort zone comfortably by tapping into that power state of the mind. Primal, going to keep you safe. But
Yep.
safety is not going to get you anywhere. That keeps you stuck. And so many people are stuck and afraid of change. They're stuck in their comfort zones.
Right. And I guess that's where, it's really important to develop that self-awareness. And as you said before, to talk about setting the intention. So in the next section, let's get into talking about how business owners could be more intentional with their health. All right. So Evan, how can someone really be successful and be intentional in setting their eating habits and improving their health?
Especially for the ones, people who are watching this, Evan, they're very busy business owners, right?
Yep.
So it's hard to set the intention on your health when you're trying to set the intention on building a successful business and having a successful family. So that's what I think most people here should take away, is how can we set that intention with their health while they're busy in all other realms?
And it's a great question. I think the main problems that business owners have, it boils down to three things. They're afraid of change. They're stuck in their comfort zone because they're just afraid of the change that's happening. The second thing is that they're overwhelmed with just being in charge of the everyday running of the business, of constantly putting out fires, and that everyday stress leads to long-term anxiety because they don't understand that they need to ask for help, and they get to burnout. And the last thing that happens is they don't experience mojo anymore. Mojo is moments of spontaneous joy because they're not living in the present. I mean, the problem right now is that most people, when they've done the research and they looked at surveys of business owners, and they found, like, where are they spending most of their times thinking? Rumination, right? Well, 12% of it's in the present. So, I'm sorry, in the past. So you're thinking only 12% is in the past. That's regret sometimes in the past. You're spending about 28% in the present. Well, we're spending more than double that amount of time in the future. And most people are wasting their time because do you have any control over the future? No, you have control over the precious present, which is part of what I try to help people do, is to slow down so they can speed up. That slow down is spending time being mindful, of being intentional. And there are specific tools that I use. One of them is my commitment log. All my clients get one of these. It's what can you commit to? What are the behaviors that you can do every day that if you did them with 100% commitment and 100% integrity, that's going to get you 3 steps closer to where you want to go? They also need to think about what kind of support and cooperation do they need? And they have to ask for it. I don't just say, hey, ask your wife or your husband or, whoever it is, your boss or your coworkers. They need to be very explicit. I've had lots of clients that they've never asked. And when you start asking, amazing things start to happen. Yeah. And probably the most important thing I have them do is I ask them to think about 4 key areas of their lives. I talk about it: the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. You need to make deposits in your physical bank account. That's called generating energy. Then you need to make deposits in your mental bank account, which is striving for excellence. The third one is making connections. It's your need to love and be loved. And last is really seeking purpose. It's your need for a legacy, for spiritual connections. So those are just some of the things that I work on. And I call it my tools in the toolbox. I have over 60 tools. Each person is unique, and there's so many ways to get where they need to go. I don't have one way of eating, one way of thinking. There needs to be that freedom for people to choose, because I do believe it's all about choice. And when they make those choices and they make those commitments and keep them, it's like, as a business coach, you can relate to this. It's like putting money in the bank. And in the beginning, right now, let's say they don't have a lot of money in their bank. So they're in scarcity mentality, and they're constantly in the primal state. They don't have the money to pay the bills. But what if they started to make more money and they started to build that bank account, and then they had dividends? They have freedom. And it's the same way that their commitments become greater than their compulsions when they make those deposits in those bank accounts that I call health deposits.
So this is, let's see if I got this right and I could summarize it for everyone listening and watching. I think to be intentional, there's really three things that you need to do. So number one is you have to have awareness. Number two is you have to be in the present. And number three is you have to pay attention to making deposits into those four areas. Would that be correct?
Absolutely.
Great. All right. So in the next section, we're going to talk about what, Tom? Your inner.
We're going to talk about the inner critics.
All right. All right. So in this section, we're going to talk all about the inner critic. Now, here's the thing is most of us who are in business, Evan, became successful because of that inner critic, right? We're constantly like living up to our own like high level of what we want to do. And that's fortunate and unfortunate. And Tom, that's why we have Tom here at Atomic Business Coaching, because we're constantly working with that. So why don't you talk about it from the health side? You know, we're always talking about from the business side, but why don't you bring it in from the health side?
And the reason why it's similar is because you can't separate one from the other. When you have private victories with your health and taking better care of yourself, you're going to have public victories with the company. And they can't really separate. That's why I see many business owners who consider themselves successful, but they're falling apart. And there's, the last 10, 20 years of their lives, why should they be spending their time taking care of chronic illness? And that's where the inner critic comes in. It's about quieting the inner critic. First, where did the inner critic come from? The inner critic is just a way I've designed the inner critic mind to just express the different layers of identity that we have. Everything that happens in our lives is woven as a fabric into our belief systems. And there are times when we are children, usually within the first 6 to 7 years of our lives, where we're developing this inner critic based on what we're reacting to. Like for me, I was creative, so I would draw with crayons on the wall. Now, if I had Einstein's mom, she would have sat down and she would have drawn with me, which is what happened with Einstein. He spilled milk on the floor and Einstein's mom sat down and played with him and then said, okay, it's time to clean up. Not my mom. If my mom had it was like, and what did I do? I reacted, but here's what happens. When you're a child, you want to feel safe. You want to feel that you're secure. And you hear your mother or this scary mom come out, and because you don't have that ability, you blame yourself that, must be something I did, that there's something wrong with me because my mom is my mom. And so I must be bad. And this creates the different layers of the inner critic, whether it has to do with approval, self-reliance, or reliability. Those are really the root causes of these inner critics that I created. There's 10 of them, and each one has a different flavor. I have one I would call him the perfectionist maestro. My wife would disagree, but I know that it's in there. And the faceless judge. You're just not good enough. You're not strong enough. You're not good looking enough. You're just not enough. And the inner critic says, like you said, Tom, you'd be nothing without me. You'd be sitting on the couch doing nothing. You need me. I'm your best friend. And that lie is really what we need to get to. That lie it's a lie. It's a deception to keep you in your comfort zone. And how do you stop the lie? Well, it's not about shutting it up. I talk about silencing or quieting the inner critic, but it's about developing that part of you, that child, going back and developing that part of you that said, I'm no good, and looking at it through the eyes or the lens of the adult and practicing. I have a 21-day inner critic challenge that allows people, it's on my YouTube channel. It allows people to practice for a minute a day. It's just exercise takes a minute a day. Like you said, they didn't have time. They're busy. If you can't give me a minute, I can't help you.
Right.
And what happens is when you shine light on this inner critic, it shrinks. It's there to get attention. It's there to keep you safe, but it doesn't serve you anymore. So what I do is I help them develop new habits based on new belief systems. I call them new neural circuits. We've got to fire those neural circuits differently. And it takes time. But what happens is suddenly they're no longer listening to those lies and they're starting to develop the power side. instead of the primal side of their identity.
Evan, it's very interesting the way you're talking about the inner critic. And, I approach coaching with every one of our clients from the perspective that everyone has at some point in their life been exposed to some form of trauma, right? I approach everything in a trauma-informed response. And, we know that food and a lot of these behaviors and habits are often rooted in some kind of childhood trauma or some kind of trauma someone's experienced. And do you have an inner critic that's a trauma-based inner critic? And how have you dealt with people? How have you coached people who have experienced some kind of trauma and look at food as a comfort item? How do you help them to change that habit? Because, it comes about when we stress eat and when we do the things, we want that comfort because we're stressed out, but that's usually rooted somewhere else. Tell us a little bit about that.
And it's a great point. I come from a history of trauma in my background. Yes, was abuse, whether it was physical abuse, getting bullied, and other abuses that happened to me. And luckily I survived, but at what cost? So part of it was this control with this inner critic that I had. It was constant controlling. And what I find with my clients is when they have this control like this, they squeeze your hand right now really tight. You hold it and you hold it. What happens is it starts to hurt after a while. And you do it day in, day out. You're like, oh my God, I need a release. And that release is eating. Now I've dealt with eating disorders. You get binged eating disorders, anorexia. It's all about control. It's about that release because they just can't do that anymore. This release is temporary because food doesn't solve the problem.
Right.
And neither does the alcohol or the smoking or the drugs. All of those things are part of what happens when people use this inner critic to let them guide them. Part of this is really having the vision to go, well, a year from now, if you are where you want to be, what would your future self thank you for? That really takes the power away from the inner critic. And part of going through the inner critic quiz, which I'm offering to all your clients free, is that I give them who their inner critic is strongest in their head, and then also ways to quiet it. And then the 21-day challenge, which will help them also start creating new habits. And it's complicated, but in a sense, it's simple. Like you say, it's the hard work needs to be done, but change to me has to feel good.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel good, people will revert back to the old habits. It's kind of like what I call mindless imitation of yesterday. They just continuously imitate what they did the day before, because it's easier instead of going to the deeper meaning. And that's the work that I do, is I take it deeper.
Great.
I like what you say and what I'm taking away. I'm trying to always summarize this at the end for who's listening here, and just the way I've taken it away is that by silencing the way that you're silencing the inner critic, like you said, isn't really quieting them or shutting them up. It's, again, becoming aware of what they are and then replacing that with new habits or new activities or new mindsets, and then carrying through and doing the things that will actually optimize your health, instead of dealing with the negative effects of what you thought that critic was saying about you or how you dealt with it. I like that squeezing the hand analogy. That's really good. So it's not so much as eliminating as more as it is adding on top. And then there's just really not much more space or evidence for that critic to do it any longer.
It's integrating. It's part of what happens when you're traumatized. You get stuck. It doesn't know time or space, that part of your brain, the amygdala, the limbic system. So it's constantly repeating itself. And if you can do a pattern interrupt, which is why I use mindfulness and meditation with my clients. In my elite coaching, I'll make them personalized meditations and mindfulness exercises so that I can help them create the pattern interrupts. I work with breath work. All of these things make a difference in stopping what I call the boil. If you bring it to a boil every day, that's why I said, business owners are dealing with the stress and anxiety every day. How is Steve Jobs? How did he do it? How does Elon Musk do it? They're the same they're not superhuman.
Right.
So part of it is there isn't a skill that can be taught. And that's what I teach my business owners, that there's a skill that can be taught to take better care of yourself, to have a different relationship with yourself that will release your superpowers. Because it's about the primal state is, fight or flight, survive or die, right? We don't want to die. We want to survive. But what if you got into your power state? And the thing about the primal and power state, they cannot occupy the same space at the same time. So if I can create a pattern interrupt to get you out of your primal state and then help you develop creativity and imagination, vision, and being able to just be empathetic, have some compassion for that part of you, that child part of you, what ends up happening is we allow that part of that inner critic to start growing up instead of being stuck. They start changing and growing, and they become you can't see it, but up on my shoulder here is my inner coach. I keep him on my shelf. It's my Yoda.
Smart. All right. So in the next section, we're going to talk about how we strengthen our attitudes towards health. All right, Evan. So we have some interesting mindsets. We have the inner critic. We're talking about how to change our lives with our mind instead of our mouths. But how do we strengthen this? So really, how do we strengthen the attitude we have towards physically eating?
Well, we talked a little bit about before, but I think that creating momentum is the key. I teach my clients how to create momentum and also how to develop their attitude muscle. I call it the attitude muscle, and there's 4 muscles. We've already talked about a few. One of them is being a fly on the wall, self-awareness. The second one is create a blueprint. Houses are not built without a blueprint. You need to imagine it, and we have the vision. And once you actually have that vision, a lot of times it may not exactly be what you put down on paper, but it's maybe better, but it's giving you a blueprint. The third one is an internal compass. Everybody's got an internal compass of really understanding the difference between what works for them, what doesn't, that the thinking that they got, I tell them it's the thinking, not the eating. You've got to be aware and be sure that there is an inner physician in you that's aligned with where you want to go. And if they don't have those tools, if they're weak, we need to develop them. Just like, you want to build the muscle and the bicep, you got to go to the gym, and going once, twice, 3 times, it's not going to do it. But if with intention, if you're going 3-4 times a week to the gym, maybe more, and you're working out with intention, and you do it over a period of, let's say, 4 months, 6 months, you're definitely going to see results. It's about, but falling in love though, with that process, not with the outcome. And the last attitude muscle is taking action. It's creating momentum. I call it igniting forward momentum. And that is, to me, the most important one, because you've got to really have the courage to take charge, right? You're in charge. No one else. No one's there to save you. I'm there as a navigator. I'm not doing the work for my clients. They're the drivers. I'm the navigator. We're all driving towards the edge of a cliff. We're all going over. That's life. My job is for you to enjoy the ride. And if you're 100 feet from the cliff, we got to slow down. Right. Maybe stop, enjoy, get out of the car for, a little while.
Yeah. And that's where I saw a connection with that. When you're talking about the momentum and building a muscle, and, everybody here knows you can't go be a bodybuilder tomorrow, right? You can't go run a marathon tomorrow, right? All this takes time. And then you said the other part of it, which is you have to learn to enjoy it. And that's what I've noticed a lot with our clients, with friends, even with myself, is when you're trying to change your attitude towards health, it can't be like for this duration of time, right? And that's what so many people, I think, do, is their attitude is, well, I'll do this for now. And I think a lot of it has to be, I'll do this forever. Like, if you can't sustain your attitude towards health for the rest of your life, it's not going to work. And this is my opinion. Obviously, I don't have medical degrees like the two of you do. But when I just look at it from a logical standpoint, I'm a very instrumental support, and that's problem solving. And I think if you're going to problem solve, you got to problem solve forever, not for now, right? Because if you just solve for now, it's going to become a problem again when you stop doing that. So how do you actually have people, Evan, start to enjoy this process, enjoy gaining that momentum, enjoy building that muscle?
It's a great question, but it's all about reframing. So a lot of people think they're in a prison, and they actually are. So maybe like even in the coffin, right? 6 feet under. So what if you reframed it and said, instead of being in a coffin, you were a seed planted in the ground? You just haven't sprouted yet. And all you're doing is looking at the surface, but the roots are growing. And I work on a lot of reframing. I work on a lot of neural pathway restructuring the way that people believe things. We have to challenge. You must challenge the way that your belief systems are designed, because belief is very different than values. Values are tied to your identity. And here's your identity. Here's what your behavior is. You're still good inside. Your identity, you need to believe that you're good inside. You're a good person, right? But behaviors might be self-defeating. A lot of times people mess up both of those. And the idea is to teach them, because the inner critic is going to lie to you and let you think that your behaviors are your identity. It's to help them develop these skills, this understanding, and make very small commitments. I'm very big on tiny, tiny habits.
Yeah, the seed analogy it's really, really good, because it comes back to what you were saying earlier on, which is when you put light on the critic, it shrinks, right? And we need sunlight to grow a seed. And if you're going to change what you're doing about this and have intention, you have to go out there and water that seed every single day. So it's a good culmination of everything that you've said today with that seed analogy. And that really does, if you think of it as a seed, that would change your attitude, because if you can't just plant the seed, you're responsible for it, right? You have to actually go do the actions to get that thing to grow. If you just let it lay there dormant, it will die, right? Nothing will come of it. So that's a wonderful analogy.
It's powerful.
I don't know if you came up with it on the spot, or because I'm a big analogy guy. I love an analogy. So
very powerful.
Thank you. I'm a gardener, so a lot of my analogies are in the garden.
There you go.
I mean, business coaching, I look at my team as a garden. Sometimes there's somebody that's just growing so fast that I got to move them. And sometimes there's somebody who's floundering, and if I don't move them, it's going to die. Yeah. And being intentional and being aware that way is really important. And if you don't trim, if you don't cultivate, everything's going to look like a mess in a little bit of time. So that's why I love to garden too. It helps me be mindful and it keeps me grounded.
Beautiful. All right. In the next section, we're going to wrap this all up and see, what should you really take away? What should you expect from this?
We've talked so much about the inner critic and silencing it and putting this all into perspective and the reframing. And like we just wrapped up with the idea of the seed and how we need to grow that. So if we do all of these things, if we learn how to adjust our attitudes and do everything that you've said so far, what should we expect as an outcome?
Well, you're going to see the results that you want. I mean, part of this is about people have to see results, but I have clients that still text me after 25 years of working with them on their birthday, of letting them know how they're doing and that they're still where they want to be and they're living their best life. I had a client text me yesterday. She's a CPA, and this time of year, right? I know, this could be any time, but
today's tax day for those that are watching it.
April 15th. She texted me last night, said my blood sugars are double digits. She's lightest she's ever been. And she is doing so amazing. But now she initially came to me to say, I wanted to lose some weight for my daughter's wedding. And so she lost 30 pounds. But now the goal is she's down over 60 pounds. She wants to get off medication completely. That's what it is. It's about living your life with more mojo and living the life you've always dreamed of. Right. And having your cake and eat it too. No pun intended here, but it's, if you are doing something and you feel miserable, you're not aligned. And you can change that with your mindset. Things are hard. It doesn't mean that you can't enjoy the process, especially when you think about the outcome. Right. And I want people to be able to retire and travel the world, get down on the ground and play with their grandkids and enjoy what time they have left, not spend that time managing a chronic illness. That's really my goal. And that's really what it's all about. I really want to help people see that they can do it all, that they can make it happen. I mean, you can't control everything, but you can control your choices. You can't control what happens to you, but you can recover as quickly as possible. And you can use every opportunity to learn or grow.
Well, I love what you said in the beginning of this section is the results that you want. And it aligns so well with what Atomic Business Coaching, what our process is. Our process is believe, behave, become. And you have to believe that you're going to do these things. Then you have to behave like it and you will become it. But it needs to be your choice. And that's why I love that you said the results that you want. Because, if we're eating and just running and eating whatever is in front of us without intention, letting that inner critic get there, you're going to become something that you didn't want to be. So I believe that if you follow everything that Evan's saying here and hopefully dig in with him deeper, that you can learn to behave like it and that you will become the results that you want. So Evan, I want to thank you so much for being here today, but here's what we're going to do. I'd like to give a little plug for you, what you're doing, how anybody who's watching or listening to this can take this further with you. So why don't you let them know any of the different things that you have going on right now, and anyone who's driving, don't worry, we'll put it in the show notes. If you're watching the course, we'll have it in a separate document where you can click all the links and connect with Evan. So, but why don't you let everybody know here?
Sure. And just so you know, my process is become, be strong, be grateful. So it kind of aligns perfectly with what I didn't know that. That was great. So
why do you think we synced up so well?
I loved it. Yeah. So my website, I have proattitudes.com. If you do a /follow, it's a link tree that has everything on there where you can schedule an appointment with me. You can either take my lifestyle challenge assessment, so you can find out exactly out of 7 key areas of your life, which ones are you having challenges with. You can discover your inner critic. And I think there's a free download to my book. On my website, you can get a free download of my book, or you can buy this on Amazon.
Yep.
Beautiful. All right. So last thing, how do you work with people? Do you work, how is it? How do you operate? If someone chose to really start taking this seriously and hiring a professional like you, what can they expect? What ways do you go about actually implementing all this wisdom and getting them to take that action?
So I work with people either one-on-one. I have an elite coaching business that I work with my clients, but I also want to be able to help people beyond that. So starting in May 1st, I'll be starting a group that I had started in the past, but it's something that is about silencing your inner critic, where I want to take people understanding from a perspective of health, how they can work to silence their inner critic. And it's going to be once a week in a group program with a lot of support, along with learning what your inner critic is and having the 21-day challenge involved in it. So, and there are my Facebook group, which is called Optimized Health for Leaders. So there's free ways that people can learn to work with me. I'm on every channel, not every, but LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. So I'm post nearly every day and sometimes twice a day. So they can find content. I have a wonderful newsletter called Intentional Health on LinkedIn. It gets posted every month along with a blog on my website. So there's an awful lot of ways that you can learn to work and do some of these things on your own until you feel the need that you need the coaching. And remember, what's a coach for? I'm your navigator. I'm there to get you there faster. It's really about if you are struggling, that's what coaching is all about.
Excellent.
Fantastic.
So thanks again. And all of you who are listening or watching, if you're ready to take your health serious, I know Evan takes it serious and would help you to take it more seriously. So thanks again, Evan. We appreciate you being on.
Thank you for having me.